Okay, we're continuing with section 1.5, bias and sampling. We looked at 3 sources in the last video. Now we want to see if we can identify these 3 sources from scenarios that are given here. All right, so we have a survey of parents at an elementary school that was conducted by the teachers. And the survey asks how much time per week the parents spent helping their child with homework. So what do you think might be some bias here? Do you think it's non-response? Probably the parents responded, right? And the sampling bias has to do with not getting data from everyone that you need data from. What's happening here is response bias. Remember, response bias says that maybe the way you ask the questions or just the situation doesn't get the true response of the people. This is the student's actual teacher asking the parent, how much are you helping your kid? So, parents might be a little reluctant to maybe admit that they're not really, helping them. With elementary kids, of course, you want to help them with their homework, right? So maybe parents would inflate that number to sound like a better parent. We're all busy, right? Okay. So number 2, a survey asks, with gun violence on the rise, do you support the new gun regulation bill being considered by Congress? Okay, what do you think's happening there? These words right here are trying to get you to answer a certain way, aren't they? They're trying to get your emotions up so that you'll apply those emotions to this next part. So this again would be response bias. Okay, so let's talk about, I didn't mention this, of course, we're supposed to provide a remedy of these 2. In this one, perhaps if you really want better responses, have a third party ask the parents instead of the actual teacher of the children, or just an anonymous survey if you don't really need to tie it to each kid, each parent to each kid. People may be more truthful in that regard. So maybe a third party interviewer or anonymous survey. Would then get more accurate responses. Here, what we would do is remove the emotional wording. Okay, that's really trying to get people to answer a certain way. If they were just asked, do you support? You can't tell which way the surveyor is hoping you'll answer, right? If they do have a preference, you can't tell. If someone just asks you the part after the comma, you should just feel, like you could give whatever answer you really felt, right? So that would be better, removing that first part of the question. All right, let's look at number 3. Every receipt from Kroger has a web address for responding to a survey about the experience of shopping at Kroger and awards all respondents with 50 extra fuel points. Okay, so what kind of bias is this? Well, there shouldn't be a reason that people won't answer truthfully, right? And it's not. And so what we're seeing here is an issue where you might have sampling bias, where you're not getting everybody you really want. Why not? Well, it's a web address for one. If you don't have a computer, you are not going to be responding to this, right? So only shoppers with computers would be able to do that in an internet connection. You could possibly, so you may want to note that only computer owners, I guess, can respond. And would you even want fuel points if you don't have a car? I mean, not everybody has a car. So that's another thing. Only drivers would care about fuel points. I mean, of course they do this anyway. We're just looking for things that might be a concern with this kind of surveying, and we might say they could offer an in-store paper survey, right? That's another way they could get, maybe everybody, and maybe offer them a coupon for groceries or something. Okay. A survey mailed to all Math 1530 students has a response rate of 12%. Okay. Well, what's happening there? Non-response, right? And what could we do? Well, we could do a callback or a follow-up. Follow-up. That's what we call a callback. Doesn't have to be a telephone call. Callback. Or we could offer incentives. Extra points or something, extra credit. All right, finally, a survey of UTK alumni conducted at the stadium on game day asked if the university should allocate more money for athletics. Well, obviously, this is sampling bias because you are missing some people, right? You are missing the alumni who are not sports fans. They wouldn't be there, and so probably everybody who's answering your survey, if you're doing it at the stadium on game day, probably is really pro sports and is going to say, yeah, more money in sports. So this is not appropriate. So you probably should, survey by email or some other way where you're not just getting the sports fans. Okay, something like that. That would remedy that. Okay, that ends section 1.5.